The final amount was 420,000 Czech koruna. At the time, that came out to $17,212.48. That was for the first year's rent and a 2-month security deposit. I remember double-checking the wire transfer details she sent me for the landlord. I hit send. An hour later, I was standing on a beautiful street in a Prague neighborhood called Vinohrady, holding a set of keys she'd given me earlier. Our apartment. I looked at my watch. It was 3:05 p.m. She was supposed to meet me at 3 o'clock. By 3:30, I started to feel sick. By 4 o'clock, I called her phone. The number you have dialed is not in service. Her WhatsApp profile picture was gone. That's when I finally admitted to myself what I already knew. The apartment wasn't real, the landlord wasn't real, and the woman I thought I was building a future with was gone. But to understand how I ended up on that sidewalk, with a dead phone number and a $17,000 hole in my bank account, I have to go back. You need to see the man I was before I ever heard the word Prague. Because I wasn't a fool, I was the opposite of a fool. My entire 40-year career was built on not being a fool. I was a project manager for a major commercial construction firm out of Fort Worth. I handled multi-million-dollar builds, hospitals, office towers, the kinds of places where a single mistake on a single line of the blueprint can cost you a fortune. My job was to manage risk, to manage people, and to tell when someone was trying to pull a fast one, and I was good at it. I once saved my company over $200,000 because I noticed a subcontractor was using half-inch drywall where the spec called for 5/8, fire-rated. It was a tiny detail most people would miss, but I didn't. That was my value. I saw the details. My retirement was built on that same principle. Solid, not flashy, but secure. I had $750,000 in my 401k and savings. My house was paid off, and I had a pension that brought in another $2,200 a month. The problem wasn't my finances. The problem was the silence. My wife of 30 years, Susan, had divorced me 5 years earlier. It was one of those quiet, polite divorces. No shouting, no big drama. Just a slow, sad ending. Her parting words to me were, "Mark, you were a great provider, but you were never a partner." And those words just echoed in that big, empty house in Texas. She was right. I'd spent my life managing projects, and I'd treated my own life like one. Now, the project was over, and I was just a 64-year-old man with a perfect lawn and a profound, crushing sense of being alone. I felt invisible. That's where it all starts. Not in Prague, but on a quiet Tuesday night in Fort Worth. Scrolling through YouTube, I stumbled onto a travel vlog. A young couple walking through the Christmas markets in Prague. The lights, the old buildings, the steam rising from their mugs. The vlogger talked about how friendly the people were, how beautiful the city was, how you could live well for a fraction of what it costs in the States, and a seed was planted. It looked like the exact opposite of my quiet, predictable, empty life. That same night, I joined 3 different expats in Prague Facebook groups, just gathering information. And that's where I first saw her name, Katerina. She answered a question I posted about long-stay visas. Her profile wasn't like the others. No selfies with a beer. It was all artistic photos of the city, of architecture, of shadows on cobblestone streets. She said she was a freelance translator, originally from Brno but living in Prague. For 6 months, that's all it was. We'd exchange messages. I'd ask her about life in the Czech Republic. She'd ask me about Texas. She was patient, intelligent, and she never asked for a thing. She was just a friend. She was laying the foundation, you see. And for 6 months, I let her do it, because I had no idea I was on a job site. The 2 weeks I spent visiting Prague felt like waking up after a long, gray sleep. and flying back to Texas was like being put under anesthesia again. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty in a way it hadn't been before. Before Prague, it was the sound of my retirement. Now it was the sound of a future I didn't want. We talked every day after that. Video calls, WhatsApp messages. It was Katerina who first said it out loud. She was on her screen, coffee in hand, morning light hitting the buildings behind her. She just said, "You should be here, Mark. You should be drinking this coffee with me." It wasn't a demand. It was a statement of fact. And it hit me harder than any sales pitch. She was right. That's when I shifted from a tourist to a planner. I was a project manager, after all. A new life in the Czech Republic was just a new project. So I started running the numbers. I opened a spreadsheet the same way I would for a $50 million hospital build. My income, my pension, $2,200 a month, plus what I could safely draw from savings. My costs, I spent hours on websites, converting crowns to dollars. A transit pass for Prague's public system, groceries, health insurance, and rent. I saw apartments in neighborhoods like Žižkov or Smichov for maybe 20,000 crowns a month, about $870. My pension alone could cover that, and then some. Financially, it wasn't just viable, it was smart. I could live a full, exciting life in the center of Europe for less than it cost me to keep the lights on in an empty house in Texas. She was the one who started sending me apartment listings. And then one day she sent a link to a place that made me stop breathing. It was in Vinohrady, a one-bedroom but huge, high ceilings, big windows looking out over a leafy street, fully furnished with beautiful, modern furniture. "This is it, Mark," she wrote. "This is our place." The rent was higher than the others, 30,000 Czech koruna a month, but that was still only around $1,300. I could already picture us there, and that's when the first real change order came in. "The landlord is a nice older man," Katerina explained over a video call, "but he's very traditional. He's worried about renting to a foreigner, an American, with no Czech job or credit history." I could see the logic in that. I wouldn't rent a property to someone under those conditions either. "But," she continued, "I talked to him. I told him all about you, about us, and he's willing to make an exception." I felt a surge of pride. She was fighting for us. "He just has one condition. If we want to secure it, he wants the first year's rent and a 2-month security deposit paid up front to show we are serious." The math was simple. 12 months at 30,000 crowns is 360,000. The deposit was another 60,000. A grand total of 420,000 Czech koruna, $17,200. And for the first time in this whole process, a red flag went up. A big one, the kind of flag that stops work on a job site. That's a lot of money to give to a stranger. I must have gone quiet because her face on the screen changed. The bright look was gone, replaced by a deep, profound hurt. "Mark," she asked, her voice soft, "you don't trust me." It wasn't a question. I spent weeks finding the perfect place for us. I convinced this landlord to trust a man he has never met. I am building our future, and you are looking at me like I am a liar. She started to cry. "I thought we were a team, Mark. I thought this was real. But if you don't trust me with this, if you think I am trying to cheat you, then what kind of future can we have? Just forget it. The apartment will be gone tomorrow. Some other couple will get it. We can just forget it." And that was the moment, the final test. Every alarm bell from my professional life was screaming, but another voice was screaming louder. It was the voice of my ex-wife saying, "You were a provider, not a partner." It was the voice of my own loneliness in that big, silent house. Rejecting her request felt like proving Susan right. It felt like choosing to be a manager instead of a partner, and I couldn't bear that. The fear of losing this new life was infinitely greater than my fear of losing the money. "No," I said, my voice firm. "No, you're right. I'm sorry. I trust you. Of course I trust you. We're a team. Send me the landlord's bank details. I'll make the transfer. The moment I hit send on that wire transfer, the knot in my stomach didn't just loosen, it vanished. It was replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, a deep, profound sense of rightness. I had faced the biggest risk of the project, the trust fall, and I hadn't flinched. I had chosen to be a partner, and Katerina's reaction was my reward. The tears were gone, replaced by a smile that lit up her whole face. I'll call the landlord right now, Mark. It's ours, our home. The next 3 months were a blur of project management, but this time, the project was my own life. I put the house on the market and it sold in 2 weeks. I hired an estate sale company to deal with 30 years of furniture and possessions. I stood in the empty living room and felt nothing but lightness. Every piece of furniture hauled away felt like dismantling a structure that was no longer needed. I kept only 2 suitcases, a laptop, and the pension that would be my steady paycheck. The flight to Prague was a 9-hour dream. I sat there looking out the window, and for the first time since my divorce, the future wasn't a question mark. It was a picture. Every message from Katerina confirmed it. She was busy getting the utilities transferred, buying little things for the apartment, setting up our new world. She was waiting at baggage claim at Václav Havel Airport. She looked even more beautiful than I remembered. She gave me a hug that felt like coming home. "I am so happy you're finally here," she said. "Listen, I am so sorry, but I have a last-minute meeting with a translation client, a big one. I can't get out of it." My old brain might have seen a flicker of a red flag. But the new Mark just saw a professional woman handling her business. I was proud of her. "Don't worry about it," I told her. "Go, make your money." She smiled. "Exactly." She reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys on a simple silver ring. "Here, this is for you." "I have my own set. Go to the apartment. Get settled. I'll be there at 3:30 at the latest, and I'll bring groceries. We'll have our first dinner at home tonight." She gave me a quick, passionate kiss. Then she turned and walked away into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, the keys feeling heavy and real in my hand. The key to my new apartment, to my new life. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address in Vinohrady, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. The building was exactly as I remembered from the pictures, but better. A beautiful pale yellow facade with ornate white carvings around the windows. It looked solid and permanent. The kind of place a man could build a life in, not just rent. I paid the driver, pulled my 2 suitcases from the trunk, and stood there for a moment just looking at it. This was the building, my building. I walked up the 3 stone steps to the heavy wooden front door and tried the large, old-fashioned key. It slid in cleanly, turned with a satisfying, well-oiled clunk, and the door swung open. A wave of relief washed through me, relief that was so powerful it almost made me laugh out loud. Of course it worked. She was a woman who got things done. She had handled the landlord, handled the contract, handled the whole complicated process of getting me here. Of course she had handled the keys. I stepped inside. The foyer was cool and quiet, with a beautiful tiled floor and a grand staircase sweeping upward. I ignored the elevator. I wanted to take the stairs. I hauled my suitcases up the echoing marble steps to the 3rd floor, and there it was. Apartment 8, a dark wood door with a simple brass number on it. Real, solid, mine. I leaned against the wall beside my 2 suitcases and waited, already picturing the moment she'd arrive. I imagined hearing her footsteps on the stairs, seeing her face when she rounded the corner and found me there, already home. I was early, 2:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to spare, and I was fine with that. 3 p.m. came and went. I wasn't worried yet. A project manager knows schedules. Plus or minus 15 minutes is normal. Her client meeting probably ran long. That was a good sign, actually. It meant she was in demand. At 3:15, I shifted my weight and checked my phone. No messages. I told myself she was probably still in the meeting. Phone on silent. Completely normal. At 3:20, the first flicker of something other than excitement arrived. Just a question mark. An unexpected item on the punch list. Why hadn't she sent a quick message? Running a few minutes late. Something. She was always communicative. I pushed the thought down. This wasn't a job site. You don't manage a relationship with suspicion. I had already made my choice when I sent that wire transfer. I had chosen trust. I couldn't go back on that now just because she was 20 minutes late. At 3:30, the silence in the hallway felt different, heavier. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty, and the slow, cold knot forming in my stomach was no longer easy to ignore. The project manager, the 40-year professional who had spotted half-inch drywall masquerading as 5/8, was starting to shove the hopeful partner out of the way. He was running through the checklist: wire transfer, sent to an unverified account, lease agreement, signed in a language you cannot read, by someone you've never met in person, as a landlord, property verification, none. He was pissed. He was screaming at me. But I'd been shutting him up for 6 months. I shut him up one more time. At 3:45, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I called her number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, her voice warm and cheerful, asking me to leave a message. I hung up without speaking and immediately opened WhatsApp. "Hey, I'm here, at the apartment. Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen, watching for the 2 blue check marks that meant she'd read it. 1 gray check mark appeared. Sent, not delivered. My thumb hovered over the WhatsApp call button. I pressed it. The screen just said, "Calling." A quiet digital cry into a void that didn't answer back. At 4 p.m., I called her regular number one more time. No ringing this time. Just a recorded voice, first in Czech, then in English. "The number you have dialed is not in service." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not out of service area. Not the customer is unavailable. Not in service. My hands were shaking as I opened WhatsApp again. I stared at her name, and as I watched the screen, her profile picture, the beautiful artistic photo of a Prague rooftop at sunset that I had looked at hundreds of times over the past 6 months, vanished. It was replaced by the generic gray outline of a person who isn't there, a ghost. I sank down onto one of my suitcases right there in the hallway. I couldn't feel my legs properly. The last, desperate part of me was still running through alternative explanations. A technical glitch, a stolen phone, a misunderstanding, anything. Just then, I heard the elevator doors open down the hall. An older woman with a small dog stepped out. She looked at me. This stranger, this large American man, sitting on a suitcase in the hallway at 4 in the afternoon, with a flicker of curiosity that shaded toward concern. I stood up and held out my phone, showing her a photo of Katerina, the one of us from my visit, smiling by the Charles Bridge. My hand was trembling so badly I could barely hold the screen steady. "Excuse me," I said, my voice coming out hoarse and strange. "Do you know this woman? Does she live here, in number 8? The woman leaned in, squinting at the screen. She looked from the photo to me, then back again. She shook her head slowly. "Nay." A simple, quiet no. She saw the look on my face, the desperation, the collapse happening in real time, and her expression shifted. She pointed at the door to apartment 8 and said, in careful, broken English, "Tady bydlí pan Novak, family, with children, for 10 years. She gave me a small, sad shrug, tugged her dog's leash, and walked to her own apartment, leaving me alone in the silent hallway. Family, for 10 years. It wasn't just a lie. It was a complete fiction. A set built on an empty lot. There was no apartment. There was no landlord. and there was no Katerina. I picked up my 2 suitcases, walked down the grand marble staircase, and stepped back out onto the beautiful street in Vinohrady. The sun was starting to go down. The keys felt like poison in my hand. $17,212 for a set of useless keys and a lesson that I, a man who built his life on seeing the details, had paid a fortune to ignore. I hailed a taxi. "Where to?" the driver asked cheerfully. I didn't have an answer. "A hotel," I finally managed. "Just a hotel. Clean. Cheap." I checked into a generic business hotel near the train station. The room was small, white, and smelled of disinfectant. It was the exact opposite of the apartment in Vinohrady. It was real, and it was miserable. The next morning, I did what a project manager does after a catastrophic failure. I started the post-mortem. I found the address for the Policy Czech Republic and walked in, took a number, and waited on a plastic chair in a gray waiting room. The whole place felt bureaucratic and impersonal. Eventually, a young officer called me over. He spoke good English. I told him everything, the whole story, from the beginning, from the Facebook group all the way to the keys in my hand and the gray silhouette where her photo used to be. I could feel my face flushing with shame as I talked. Saying it out loud made it sound so obvious, so completely, painfully stupid. I showed him the photo of Katerina. He glanced at it without much interest. He'd seen 100 like it. I showed him the wire transfer confirmation on my phone. 420,000 Czech koruna. He sighed. Not an unkind sigh, but a tired one. The sigh of a man who sits at this desk and hears this story more often than anyone should. He said the words, "romance scam." He explained that the bank account I'd sent the money to was almost certainly a mule account, opened with a stolen ID and emptied within minutes of my transfer clearing. "The money is gone, sir," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We will file the report, of course, but the chance of recovery, it is almost zero. I am very sorry." He gave me a form to fill out, a crime report. It asked for the total amount lost. I wrote down the 420,000 crowns. Then I added everything else. The $1,000 dental emergency loan from months earlier, the plane tickets, the gifts. The running total came to just over 20,000 American dollars. I wrote that number on the page, and my hand was shaking. It felt like signing a death certificate. For one desperate decision, one choice made in a Prague living room with a spreadsheet full of beautiful numbers and a woman with tears on her face, I had paid 20 years of careful work. I spent 4 more days in that hotel room, walking the city for hours with no destination. Prague was still beautiful, but now its beauty felt like a taunt. I'd see couples walking by the river and feel a hot flash of something between rage and grief. I booked a flight home, back to Texas, back to a city where I no longer owned anything. The phone call to my old realtor to ask if she knew of any rentals was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then quietly, "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry." On my last night in Prague, sitting in that sterile hotel room with the sound of the city coming through the window, a city that was supposed to be mine, I opened WhatsApp one final time. I looked at her empty profile, the gray silhouette where a real person was supposed to be. I typed, "Was any of it real?" I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I deleted them. What was the point? I already had the answer. I turned off the phone, put my head in my hands, and for the first time since my divorce, I cried. Not for the money, but for the man who was so desperate for a second act that he was willing to burn his whole life down for a fantasy. I cried for his loneliness. I cried because Susan had been right all along. I was a provider. And the one time I tried to be a partner, I was just a mark. So that was a year ago. I'm back in Texas now. A small 2-bedroom apartment, 30 minutes outside Fort Worth. On paper, the $20,000 I lost was less than 3% of my savings. I can recover from it. My pension of $2,200 a month still comes in. I'm not going to starve. But the hit to my confidence, that's a different story. Every time I log into my bank account, I see that number. And it's not just a number. It's the price I paid for a lesson I already knew. And that's why I'm making this video. Not looking for sympathy. Filing a final report on a failed project, so maybe you don't make the same mistakes. First, the biggest risk isn't the visa process. It's not the language barrier. It's not the exchange rate. The biggest risk is your own loneliness. Professional scammers don't sell you a dream vacation. They find the hole in your life, that feeling of being invisible, of being left behind, and they sell you the perfect solution to that specific pain. Katerina didn't just sell me Prague. She sold me a partnership to replace the one I'd failed at. She sold me a purpose to replace the job I'd lost. They don't just take your money, they leverage your deepest emotional needs against you. Second, never let trust be the reason you skip your due diligence. When she got emotional, accusing me of not trusting her, that was a tactic. It was designed to make me feel guilty for acting like the project manager I'd been for 40 years. You have a right to verify everything. If you're renting an apartment in the Czech Republic, you need a physical copy of the lease agreement, the Nájemní smlouva, with a notarized signature. You need to see the landlord's ID and proof they own the property. If the person you're with makes you feel bad for asking for that, you're not in a relationship. You're on a job site, and you're the one being built. And third, the big scam doesn't start with the big ask. It starts with a small test. For me, it was the $1,000 dental emergency loan. That wasn't about her tooth. It was about testing me. Could I be pushed? Was I willing to send money based on just a story? Once I sent that first $1,000, the next $17,000 became 1,000 times easier for her to ask for and 1,000 times harder for me to refuse. Recognize that first test when it comes. Because if you send that first payment, the project is already over budget and you've already lost. Look, a year later, the 17 grand still stings. But the real loss was the hope. It's tempting to believe in a shortcut to happiness, especially when you feel like you're running out of time. But if a relationship requires you to turn off the part of your brain that keeps you safe, it's not a relationship. It's a trap. So before you wire money for a promise, ask yourself this: would the person you were 10 years ago think this is a good idea? If you're an expat or thinking of becoming one, and you want to see more stories about the real risks and rewards, subscribe to this channel. Let's help each other stay safe out there.